The first Christians strove to spread the word of Jesus' salvation, as well as God's guidelines for virtuous living. Jesus' first followers had been brought up with the moral codes of their Jewish ancestors, but the sexual ethics of the Gentiles they sought to convert were dramatically different. In a world dominated by the pagan Roman Empire, a variety of sexual appetites were known and even celebrated. Their pantheon included Aphrodite, goddess of love, Pan, a pastoral fertility god, and many other deities renowned for their sexual adventures.
They decorate their bedrooms with painting hung there, regarding licentiousness as religion, and lying in bed in the midst of their embraces, they see Aphrodite locked in the embrace of her lover, Clement of Alexandria.
Roman law permitted polygamy, divorce, and prostitution, both female and male. Tradition allowed for the carnal union between men and boys, the sexual use of slaves, and the sacrifice of unwanted infants through abortion and infanticide. Christians prided themselves in a dramatically different view of sexuality.
This is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from fornication, that each one of you know how to control your own body in holiness and honor, not with lustful passion, like the Gentiles who do not know God. 1 Thessalonians 4:3.
The word fornication is found in the New Testament. Many people define fornication as any sex outside of marriage, but that is not what the word originally meant. Fornicate derives from Latin, the word fornix, meaning an archway or vault, and it became a common euphemism for brothels where prostitutes could be solicited in the vaults beneath Rome. More directly, fornicatio means done in the archway. Thus, fornication refers to prostitution. Furthermore, if you go further back, fornication was translated from the Greek word porneia. Porneia was a blanket term which referred to any serious sexual offenses which would include incest, bestiality, adultery, rape, hiring of prostitutes, and most importantly, shrine prostitution and idol worshipping. Ancient Rome was filled with thousands of statues for their gods, hundreds of free bathhouses and shrine prostitution temples. But a goddess named Sibyl was the most popular of the deities. The Romans called her Mater Diem, which meant Mother of the Gods and Protectress of Rome. Inside Sibyl's temples were galley priests. Galley priests were castrated men who offered themselves sexually to male worshippers. During the ritual ceremonies, the galley were known to make loud sexual moans and give wild erotic dances, which drove worshippers in a state of complete and unrestrained ecstasy. This ecstasy was also induced by the use of recreational drugs. A variety of drugs and alcoholic beverages were used in pagan ceremonies. Drunkenness was connected with the widespread practice of divination, a ritual act designed to allow direct communication with the false god. Worshippers believed it gave them the power to foretell the future, and also gave them insight to interpret the reasons for illnesses, misfortune, and adverse weather. A variety of species of plants were smoked and administered in enemas to induce a trance-like state. Keep in mind, ingesting psychoactive drugs anally produces a more powerful and instantaneous reaction than drugs taken orally. Once the drunkenness took effect, all too often that ecstasy would soon turn into self-flagellation, or beating and whipping of themselves, as well as self-castration. It was believed that cutting the male penis off was a way to mimic the god Attis, whom in Greek mythology was Sibyl's love interest who castrated himself after Sibyl made him go mad after a jealous betrayal. In Romans, Paul writes about the people indulging in pagan idolatry. and as a result, the people committed sexual acts that went against their nature. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible men, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creepy things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator. For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meet. It's important to note that there is no mention of two men or two women in a loving committed relationship. It doesn't even mention two women having sex. It simply says, as a result of their idolatrous ways, God gave them up to vile passions, which included women doing things against their nature, and men doing lustful things with other men. These lustful passions aren't specified, but it does bring to mind of the golden calf when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, where he found the Israelites engaged in drunken sex orgies after praying to the shrine they created. Every Clobber passage used to persecute homosexuality has a direct reference to idolatry and shrine temple sex. The reason for this is because in order to please these false gods, pagan sex would have to be a regular occurrence, and by engaging in anal or same-sex, the worshippers would prevent any impregnation. Keep in mind, this was a time before condoms, and by preventing impregnation, there wouldn't be any confusion of the bloodline passed through their children, which was not only important in the Jewish culture, but also with the Romans. Paul's use of the phrase against nature justifies many Christians' reasoning behind the persecution of gays. It is common for a Christian to call a gay person unnatural, but Paul's use of the phrase was not referring to same-sex couples, but was rather referring to pagan sex. It is clear that ancient writings show that the worshiping practice of these idols was an intense, drug-infested experience that put people in a transient state of mind, causing themselves to do things they naturally would not do, such as flagellation, castration of the penis, the sexual use of children, and human sacrifice. St. Justin, an early Christian apologist, addresses Romans in his writings, saying, "We see that almost also exposed not only the girls but also the males are brought up to prostitution, and as the ancients are said to have reared herds of oxen or goats or sheep, so now we see you rear children only for this shameful use." He goes on to say, "And there are some who prostitute even their own children and wives, and some are openly mutilated for the purpose of sodomy, and they refer these mysteries to the mother of the gods." Remember, the mother of gods was referring to Sybil. Furthermore, the idea of sex against nature comes from the concept of people having sex with angels.
They were trying to assume power, and because of that, they were cast out from heaven and cast down to earth.
Both in the book of Enoch and in the Hebrew Bible, the fallen angels act in direct opposition to God's will by interbreeding with humans.
In Genesis 6, it talks about the sons of gods, plural, mating with the daughters of men, and there was a certain evil connotation to it.
How can angels have sex? Enoch describes of it. Some of the extraterrestrials stood on earth. They had sex with some of our girls. That is what is written down in Enoch. It's not my invention. Enoch never calls them gods. He calls them guardian of the skies or watchman.
According to ancient texts, the fallen angels not only physically mated with the women of earth, they produced offspring. The Nephilim, a race of giants, similar to those portrayed in the story of David and Goliath.
These sexual acts were forbidden to God's law, and this is how first-century readers would have understood Paul's use of the phrase against nature when referring to sex. In conclusion, Romans 1 never condemns two men or two women in a loving, committed relationship. Romans 1 clearly addresses pagan idolatry that was rampant in Roman culture. The phrase against nature refers to the drug-infested sex rituals done to honor false gods through flagellation, castration of the penis, child prostitution, sex with angels, and human sacrifice. And finally, passage 26 does not even mention two women having sex, but says that women change the natural use for what is against nature. If Paul wanted to condemn gay people, then he would have simply said two men or two women is a forbidden love, but he doesn't. Christians have clearly taken verse 26 and 27 out of context in order to justify their personal disdain towards gay people.